Hey there everyone, welcome back to Utility Sports. Really excited to cover the Detroit Pistons with an offseason preview here today. On the channel, we've been covering a ton of different teams with offseason previews, looking at what this team can do to improve over the offseason, whether that be through free agency, trade, or the draft. And I think the Pistons are one of the most fascinating teams to talk about because there's a ton of young talent, but this team just isn't winning games. We're going to talk about some of the flaws with the team as well in this video. And we're just going to kind of deep dive into everything Detroit Pistons related. I hope you guys do enjoy. Make sure to leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you are new Pistons fans. This is going to be a great place to be for all of your draft content, as well as some free agency content that will be coming out on the channel very, very soon as well. So in this video preview, what are we going to look at in this one? First of all, we're going to start with the season recap. That is the best place to start with all of these teams. What just happened? Because you have to have a good context of where the team is at to figure out some of the feasible steps to move forward in the right direction going forward. We're then going to look at their NBA draft lottery odds and then prospects to consider as well. The Pistons are in prime position again for the draft lottery. The lowest that they can pick is number 5 overall, so there are a lot of very good prospects in this year's draft that the Pistons could land with their first overall pick. We'll then consider the Pistons free agency situation, how much projected cap space do they have, and then who are some targets that they could go out and acquire, whether that be through free agency or the trade landscape. We'll talk about both of those as well. And then finally, we'll conclude the video with my early outlook for next season. Will the Pistons be the worst team in the NBA again next year, or do we actually see some meaningful steps forward? That's a big topic of discussion, but let's get into that season recap here now. Team had a 14-68 record, which was the worst in the NBA. Just not a very good season for the Detroit Pistons, as the Monty Williams year one was a disaster. And honestly, looking back at it, I should have seen this coming a little bit more than I did. This is a little bit of a hindsight is always 2020 moment for me. But looking at the way Monty Williams coached in Phoenix, first of all, he had some elite end talent. Chris Paul was obviously the orchestrator for his offense. And then Devin Booker was your half-court go-to bucket getter. Those guys did a lot of the heavy lifting there in Phoenix. And then defensively, back when he had Mikal Bridges, he really relied on Bridges as the stopper at the point of attack for the Phoenix Suns. For better or worse, we've seen Mikal Bridges get all defense honors because of that, but at times we also saw Mikal Bridges get torched in playoff series, cough, Luka Doncic, and Monty Williams made zero adjustments. So I should have seen this coming because Monty Williams is not a big believer in heavy usage of help defense. The Pistons did not have a collection of great point of attack defenders. It should have been pretty clear that this would be a big time struggle in year one of his tenure with Detroit, but I didn't see it coming as much as I should have. And Monty Williams did a terrible job in year one. His half-court sets were pretty, I think, boring and non-creative. I think that there was not really a great blend to his offense and kind of the maximization of all of his talent that he had. Now, there are still some roster construction flaws for sure, so this doesn't all go on Monty Williams' shoulders, but a lot of it does, deservingly so. Cade Cunningham, one big takeaway is he's a capital S star. He is really going to be the future of the Detroit Pistons. Obviously, year 2 of his career was derailed by injuries. We didn't really get to see him too much. Year 3 was a big time season for him. His efficiencies all took a big step forward. His volume took a big step forward. He was scoring 20 points a game for Detroit. And during some of the bad stretches, especially their big time losing streak that set an NBA record, Cade Cunningham was really the big sole bright spot for a lot of that, where he was willing this team to competitive games that they didn't necessarily always win, but games that he took them down to the wire. And you can see some of the star potential that he has, and you can see some of the upside that he still possesses. Once there's more talent around him, and especially more spacing around him, I think he's going to take a big leap forward and really turn into a true all-star level player year in, year out for Detroit. Then I think the next player worth talking about is Jaden Ivey, and there were a lot of flashes this year. However, there were also some big struggle points, and I know some Pistons fans are probably going to be out on Jaden Ivey. They're going to say, oh, we got to trade him, maximize him, turn him into a veteran, this, that, or the other thing. First of all, Jaden Ivey was really, really, really good in the 20 games that Cade Cunningham did not play alongside of him. And you might say, okay, well, what good does that do us? I think that points to his talent level. That points to who he can be as a player, where he averaged nearly 19 points per game with Cade Cunningham out, averaged over 5 assists, over 4 rebounds, and his efficiency even had an uptick with higher volume, higher usage, and none of that is surprising for me. When I evaluated him as a draft prospect, I looked at him as a point guard, not a shooting guard, not a combo guard. And for Detroit, obviously, yes, you want Cade Cunningham to have the ball a lot, but the Pistons need to find a blend of having Cunningham and Ivy both with the basketball, with creative sets that allows both of them to play into their strengths. For Cade Cunningham, that's rising up into his mid-range jump shot. For Jaden Ivey, that's him getting to his right hand as a finisher at the rim and giving him opportunities to get downhill as quick as possible because he's one of the fastest players in the league. I don't think Monty Williams did a good job finding these two guys' balance in their offense, and it almost felt like they were kind of playing against each other at certain times. And Ivy, his stats represent that. He scored less than 15 points per game in the 57 games he played alongside Cade Cunningham compared to the near 19 he scored when Cunningham was out. This is not anti-Cade propaganda. I'm a big believer in Cade Cunningham. Like I said, he's a capital S star. I think Jaden Ivey could be a capital S star as well. They just have to figure out a way to make those two guys mesh because they're the most important pieces of the Pistons' future going forward. One big step forward in a trade that Troy Weaver made at the trade deadline was to acquire Simone Fontecchio from the Utah Jazz, and he thrived. Shot over 40% from three on huge volume there in Detroit after the trade deadline. Now, he didn't play every single game post-trade deadline, but when he was on the floor, he was very, very productive for them. And I liked that trade for them. Yes, they gave up pick 31 ultimately, and you might say, oh, that's a lot to give up for a guy like Simone Fontecchio, who's not really that young and doesn't have a ton of, perceived upside or superstar talent or anything crazy like that, but he's a good fit. And this is where Detroit has to continue taking steps forward. Players that fit around Cunningham, Ivy, and Duren, those are the players that really, really matter for them to continue to add to their roster. Fontecchio is a really great starting point for them. Then I want to talk about Isaiah Stewart, who was super steady for them this year. I think his three-point volume and three-point consistency has definitely taken strides forward over the last couple of seasons. He deserves a lot of credit for trying to make it work. Now, playing him at power forward, I'm still not sure if that's the move for the Pistons long term. Now, I know Pistons fans are going to talk about his three-point percentage and increasing three-point volume and say, look, he can be a stretch four. It's not really the three-point volume for me that stands out as a problem playing him at power forward. It's actually his ability to create off the dribble as a power forward. And I just think Detroit's offense lacks a little bit of juice around Cunningham because of that. So I think if Detroit wants to maximize Isaiah Stewart, it's playing him as a five more frequently, spacing the floor even more for Cade Cunningham. Listen, James Wiseman, yes, he's been productive in minutes as a scorer. I just think it's time to cut bait there. If you want to try and win games, I think you have to play Isaiah Stewart as your backup center. That's what I would do, but I understand some of the Pistons fans who do believe Stewart can be impactful as a power forward. Listen, I'm not saying all of his minutes have to be a five-man, but I think if you want to maximize him, that's where you're going to see him playing a little bit more frequently. Then we also had just the ups and downs of a young roster. There's no, there's kind of to be expected for a team. When you have Jalen Duren, who was the youngest rookie last year and still extremely young coming into this season. You have Ausar Thompson and Marcus Sasser. Sasser, a little bit of an older rookie, of course, but Ausar Thompson, relatively young as well. You're playing a lot of young players in a very veteran-oriented league, a league that, if you're trying to win games, you need to have guys in their mid to late 20s and early 30s. That's just the reality. Detroit did not have a ton of those guys. Obviously, OKC is the kind of outside the box team for that. They win with a lot of young guys. But Detroit, they're just not in a position to do that. And I think Duren, with a head coaching change, I think you could tell a lot of his wires were kind of crossed up this year, where some of the things he was asked to do last year weren't the same as what he was expected to do this season. And I think that he wasn't really able to build upon last year much. I think he was kind of learning a lot of new things this year. I think his pick and roll defense was definitely at the forefront of some of the concerns this year. But outside of that, I think that Detroit, again, with Monty not really providing a lot of help defense, was probably setting Duren up for failure in a lot of ways as well. So I would hold on to my Duren stock if I were you. Don't get so low on him. Yes, he had some flaws this year, but I think Monty Williams is still at the forefront of those problems. And we need some changes there in Detroit in terms of the X's and O's and schematic design in order to maximize this roster. Ausar Thompson, the jump shot's still a problem. And like I said, all draft cycle long, I think it's more concerning for Ausar than it is for Amen, because Amen has a little bit more playmaking juice, a little bit more ability with a live handle than Ausar does. So we're still going to see how Ausar develops, but he's a freak athlete, someone who still definitely has a role in this league. It's just about finding creative ways for Detroit to employ him and maximize him. And this team made a bunch of big in-season trades. Made a trade with New York, got Quentin Grimes, who didn't play very well for them, but I like the idea of at least acquiring him, especially with what they had to give up in those deals. And they just shook up their roster a ton, traded Monte Morris to Minnesota. The Pistons have had a lot of revolving pieces. They had, I believe, 31 players on roster this year, which is just incredible. That's literally 2 NBA rosters, basically. So a lot of credit to Detroit for at least trying to figure out their future and being aggressive in moves to set themselves up for better long-term success and not just holding on to Bojan Bogdanovic and Alec Burks anymore. Clearly, those two guys were not helping there. Bojan Bogdanovic, I think, was such a fake stats player in Detroit where, yes, he put up 20 points per game, but he also was probably one of the worst defenders in the league during his time in Detroit. So I think the Pistons, they made a lot of smart moves at the trade deadline. Now it's just about trying to figure out ways to harness their talent, especially their young talent, into winning and surrounding these players with people that fit their current roster construction. Which leads us to their lottery odds, and they are at the top of the board yet again. They cannot pick any lower than 5th overall, but Pistons fans, I need you guys to look at this lottery odds chart. Okay, this is super important. That 5th overall spot, there's a 48% chance you're picking 5th overall. So I know Pistons fans, every time you see a Tankathon lottery simulation, or in the event that on lottery night, May 12th, the Pistons fall to pick number 5, every Pistons fan can be crying saying, oh, woe is us, why us? It's almost 50-50 that you're either picking top 4 or 5th, okay? So falling to 5th is not crazy. This is the way that the new lottery system is set up. It is meant to make teams not want to tank. And the Pistons, who have consistently been one of the worst teams in the league over the last half decade or so, have been constantly burned by this, which obviously is unfortunate for them, and you'd love to get a number 1, number 2 overall pick. But the reality is the Pistons have just as likely of a chance to pick 5th as they do in the top 4. So you can't sit and cry about picking 5th overall because of the way that the rules are set up. You're not intended to be picking number 1 year in, year out, and the Pistons have been really at the forefront of an example of how the lottery has really kind of reshifted the way that the draft is intended to work, and how being the worst team in the league doesn't guarantee you a top 2, top 3 pick anymore. And I think it's for the better that the league is set up that way, but obviously the Pistons have been burned by that a bit as well. So let's say now that they obviously are a lock to be in the top 5, who are some NBA draft targets that actually just make genuine sense for them? And there's really 2 ways to look at it. You could either draft based solely off of fit, or draft based solely off of talent. Now, the graphic here doesn't necessarily just indicate that they'll take any of these guys, right? Like Rob Dillingham, I would be pretty surprised if they took, but you never know. Montes Buzelis, I'd be kind of surprised if they took, but you never know. On the left side, the fit side, you have Zachary Rissacher. He's obviously been a hot topic of discussion in draft circles. His play has been rather inconsistent and unsteady this year, at times shooting the ball extremely well, close to 50% from 3 for long stretches of time. And then he's also had stretches where he shoots around 30% from 3 for long durations of time. So people right now are kind of all over the place with Rissacher. Some people view him as a potential number 1 pick. Some people view him a little bit closer to pick number 7, 8. And it really comes down to how you view those shooting streaks. I think for me, looking at him, there's defensive versatility, and he's a great fit onto Detroit's roster because he has natural positional size. He can play the power forward position because he stands around 6'10"-ish. He rebounds the basketball decently, not great, but decently, and he shoots the ball willingly. Even if he's not connecting on all of those, the Pistons need more perimeter gravity. I think Rissacher could help in that regard. Reed Sheppard, another player who I think some Pistons fans would moan and groan if they drafted on draft night, especially in the top 3. Reed Sheppard would be a phenomenal fit in Detroit. He could complement Jaden Ivey. He could complement Cade Cunningham. Obviously, the Pistons do have a collection of guards. Marcus Sasser plays into that as well. But Reed Sheppard's a really good basketball player. He does things on the ball, he does things off the ball that are valuable and contribute to winning. I think Reed Shepard would be a great pickup for the Detroit Pistons. Cody Williams out of Colorado, another player who I think would fit extremely well there. Now I know people are going to point to the lack of three-point shooting volume as why he maybe doesn't fit as well in Detroit. I think the fact that he gets to the paint a ton and is very capable of playing off the catch, that's the most important attribute that he has in terms of fitting into Detroit, in my opinion. He can play off the wing. He doesn't need to dribble the ball 15, 20 times to get to a spot. He catches and goes. And that's something that I think would be extremely valuable for the Pistons in adding to their roster currently. Matas Buzelis, a player who could fit in as that like kind of hybrid forward, playing the 3 or 4 position. Kind of a little bit reliant on his touch. I don't think he's the best choice for the Pistons in this draft cycle, but definitely could be a fit for them for sure. Then on the talent side of the spectrum, Stephon Castle, someone who doesn't really shoot the ball extremely well, I don't think would really contribute a ton to the Pistons' overall floor spacing. But what I do think is his screen navigation, point of attack defense, and his ability to get on the offensive glass as a guard. He's just kind of a gap filler. That's kind of the 2 words I've used to describe him a lot this draft cycle is gap filler. And I think the Pistons right now, with a 14-68 record, clearly they have a ton of gaps. Stephon Castle could help fill some of those, but at the same time, even though he's very talented, and I think he's going to be a very good NBA player who impacts winning, I just don't know if he's really the right player for Detroit. Rob Dillingham, probably not going to be a Detroit Piston. Even though I like Dillingham's talent a lot, I think he's an electric ball handler, someone who can facilitate in the pick and roll and create his own shot. Those are all valuable traits that he has. I just don't know if those are the skills Detroit is lacking right now. I already discussed how Ivy wasn't maximized next to Kate Cunningham. I'm just not sure there's really a world that they can make Rob Dillingham work with both Ivy and Cunningham, let alone with just one of them even. Alex Sarr, I think, is the most hot topic discussion here for Pistons basketball, though. If the Pistons were to secure the number 1 overall pick, would Alex Sarr be worth the draft selection for them specifically? That's a mixed bag of answers. Some people are going to scream yes because you want to take more talent, get more actual skill in your building, in your organization, especially when you're a 14-win team. Some people will say, well, how does he fit next to Jalen Duren? How does he fit next to Cade Cunningham? He's not a high 3-point volume shooter yet. How do you expect this guy to contribute to their spacing and contribute to great offensive basketball? But on the flip side, you could look at it and say, well, he's a great defensive prospect, and Detroit's still not a very good defensive team. He could be a really nice a really nice piece to kind of maximize Detroit's defense. You can switch with him a bit. You can play in hedge and recover. You can play at the level of the screen and blitz, especially if you have him and Duren both on the floor. You have rim protection from 2 spots instead of just 1. That's where some real value could lie in Alex Sarr. So for me, if I'm the Pistons, I would not shut Alex Sarr out of my evaluation. In fact, if I had the first overall pick, I would likely take Alex Sarr because I think he's one of the safer prospects in this entire draft from a defense size touch skill set perspective. I think he kind of checks a lot of the boxes with his mobility and kind of the things that he provides on the offensive end as well, with an emerging handle and some real shot touch on mid-range pull-ups and floaters and some of the things that he likes to do. Now, I'd like for him to exert some more rim pressure. I'd like for him to shoot more threes, obviously, but I think for the most part, his skill set does point to one that will be able to develop and kind of blossom in the NBA over time, over 3-4 years. He's not going to be a year 1 all-star or anything crazy like that. You're looking at a player who's going to take some time to develop offensively, but the wait is probably going to be well worth it because of what his traits point him to being, which is a very high-quality starter in the NBA. So when it comes to their free agency situation, outside of just adding in the draft, they are projected to have over $60 million in cap space, which is the most in the NBA, but they still have significant needs. They need to get more shooting. They need to get better defensive players in the building. They need to improve their roster, and they need to do so with veteran players. They can't just have 22, 23-year-old players on their roster. They need to add some serious veteran presence into their locker room, guys who care about winning, guys who have been around winning, guys who want to win games. And the Pistons are sorely missing all of those aspects. So who are some potential targets that make a good deal of sense? Well, at the upper echelon of free agency, there's some options. Paul George of the Los Angeles Clippers has been non-committal on committing to the LA Clippers this offseason. Now, my assumption is he will ultimately get a deal done with the Clippers. If not, he might be headed toward the Philadelphia 76ers, but if Detroit came in and offered a 4-year full max contract all the bells and whistles, a player option, this, that, and the other thing, maybe that's something Paul George would consider, especially if he's not getting a full max contract offer on the market somewhere else. Klay Thompson of the Golden State Warriors, I think, would be a fantastic addition for the Pistons. The question obviously would be, what's the cost? Are you paying him $25, $30 million a year, or are you paying him more than that? If you're paying him more than that, that's a real problem. But if you're paying him $25 million a year, he could be a really good get for Detroit. And I know people are going to point to, yeah, he's aging, and he didn't play as well this year for Golden State. And trust me, those are all valid concerns. You definitely don't want a player to get paid based off of past production. You want to pay him for what he's going to do for your organization. And that's where I think Klay Thompson's value still lies. He is one of the highest volume off-screen shooters in the league. So for a team that had very little offensive structure, getting someone who just is a very good off-ball mover, I think is super valuable around Cunningham, around Ivy, and around Jalen Duren. I also think that will force Monty Williams to coach in a different way. And obviously Klay Thompson would be a great just floor spacer for them, even if he's not moving. He's a real threat. But when he moves, especially, it gets the defense shifting in ways that will make Cade Cunningham's life easier, both as a playmaker, but predominantly as a scorer. Nick Claxton, another player who stands out to me as an upper echelon free agent target. He's going to get paid very, very handsomely this offseason, over $25 million a year if I had to guess. But he's got a lot of upside still on the defensive end of the floor. I think there's levels that he can reach that he hasn't personally yet in terms of his accolades and accomplishments that he's been recognized for. But he's a really, really darn good player. He's got also, I think, a really good touch around the rim. And this is kind of the signing that if you go out and pay Nick Claxton, it kind of gives us an idea on where the franchise is at with Jalen Duren. Claxton, I think, would be an upgrade right now. Now, I still do believe big time in Duren's upside. I think Duren's going to become and blossom into a fantastic player, but the reality is Claxton's better right now. So if Detroit has their eyes on winning and winning quickly, as they're kind of in the hunt for a president of basketball operations, Nick Claxton could be the guy that helps them move that needle on both ends of the floor. Now, let's say they don't get any of those top three guys. Who are some players that they could settle for using some of their cap space? Hopefully not all of it. Malik Monk of the Sacramento Kings. The Kings can only offer Monk about $19.5 million a year. Detroit could comfortably go above that, around $25, $27 million, and probably acquire Monk's services. Now, this is a little bit risky. Monk coming off the bench as a sixth man. I'm not sure, again, if this is the archetype of player that Detroit really needs to improve their roster. But one thing Monk does extremely well is he gets to the paint and he kicks the ball out extremely well. So this is a move that if you sign Malik Monk, hopefully you're getting some other player with him who can really shoot it. Because in that case, you could form kind of a dynamic two-man game with Monk's downhill rim pressure and ability to get 2 feet into the paint. And then if you have a movement shooter off of him who can set his feet and fire, hopefully your offense is going to take a natural step forward, although I'm still concerned about the defensive limitations of paying probably a shooter and Malik Monk a lot of money. I'm not sure if your defense is going to take the drastic step forward that it needs. Tobias Harris, obviously a former Piston, has been linked to the Pistons a lot over the last year or so. I could see them looking for a reunion somewhere in the $15 to $20 million range. Now, I'm not sure if he's worth all of that, but I could see the Pistons looking to get someone with a recognizable name, make some type of quote-unquote big splash. Now, I'm not defending that decision, but I could see the Pistons doing that. Buddy Hield, movement shooter, for a lot of the same reasons we talked about with Klay Thompson. Buddy Hield could be useful as a ghost screener. That's one of his most useful play types. The play next to Tyrese Halliburton was really, I think, great for Hield's career and finding ways to thrive off the basketball alongside a guy like Halliburton. So if you're looking at maximizing Cade Cunningham, Hield is obviously a natural target for that. Although, yes, he does have his limitations, and defensively he's not the best player or anything like that. But I think there is some benefit to having Buddy Hield on your roster just from a spacing standpoint, which is probably at the forefront of Detroit's offensive concerns right now. Gary Trent Jr., despite being in the league for a long time at this point, he's only 25 years old, and I think would be a good get for them. He shot very, very well on uncontested catch-and-shoot threes this year. Also someone who I think has the defensive film and the defensive physicals to be a quality NBA defender. Now, at times the analytics haven't suggested that he is one, but I think for Detroit specifically, landing Gary Trent Jr. would really, really work in their system because he's a gritty point of attack defender who has active hands, a pretty high steal rate, and I think with with Trent Jr. possibly landing in Detroit, it would actually just help their team a bit defensively. Even though if it's not going to move the needle a ton, it's a step forward in the right direction. Isaiah Hartenstein, kind of a budget version of Nick Claxton. Not as good as Claxton on either end of the floor, but very, very versatile. You can use him at the level of the screen. You can play him in drop coverage. There's a lot of things you can do with Isaiah Hartenstein, just like I highlighted with Nick Claxton. And because of that, he's a very, very good budget center option. You could get him for around $15 million a year. That's a lot of money to give a center for sure, but he's well worth it. His film with the New York Knicks suggests that he's a starting caliber center. When Mitchell Robinson went out, Isaiah Hartenstein was awesome in the starting lineup for New York, and definitely would be a good get for Detroit long term. Then some value signings, guys who you could get for the non-taxpayer mid-level exception or even below that number perhaps. Obi Toppin of the Indiana Pacers could be a good option for them. Gives you some more athleticism. Now, I'm not sure, again, this is not really the player archetype that they need, but he's a younger player who could fit into the timeline. I could see Troy Weaver talking himself into this. He's a former first-round draft pick, former lottery choice. We know Troy Weaver has a man crush on former lottery picks. I just can't stop acquiring them, whether it's James Wiseman or Kevin Knox, whoever it is. He always seems to find himself acquiring former lottery talent, so Obi Toppin makes some sense there. Royce O'Neal of the Phoenix Suns. This would be a veteran kind of addition into their lineup. Someone who is a 3-and-D player. Now, not really sure he's a great three-point shooter, not really sure he's a great defender, but he plays within that archetype. So you can see Detroit talking themselves into that. Malik Beasley, he's the budget version of Buddy Hield, and he's the super budget version. He's the Walmart version of Klay Thompson. Not nearly as good as either of those two guys, especially not defensively. He is at times a traffic cone, can't guard a parked car, but he shoots the ball extremely, extremely well. So is he worth $12 million a year in the open market? My answer to that is maybe, maybe not. For the right team, I could see them considering it. Detroit definitely would be a team that could flirt with Malik Beasley. And if they do this right, to be honest, they could acquire one or two players from all of these lists. They could get Paul George and Klay Thompson in the same offseason with the cap space that they have. Potentially. They could also go with some mix of players like Claxton and Malik Monk, or they could go with Klay Thompson and Buddy Hield, or they could go with Paul George and Gary Trent Jr. Obviously, you need to get guys to sign on the dotted line. That's going to be the difficult part. But with the cap space they have, they're set up to sign multiple players this offseason. So any collection of these guys will improve the team. It just comes down to how long are you committing to them. Like if it's a 4-year, $75 million contract for Tobias Harris, sorry, that's not a good deal for Detroit. So even though you have money, you have to be careful about how you spend it and who you spend it on. So it'll be fascinating to watch Detroit operate this June and July. Then when it comes to trade targets, again, if they don't sign anybody, they could technically trade assets to get some of these players. Maybe one, maybe two of them even. And some guys who I could see becoming available this offseason. Zach LaVine of the Chicago Bulls definitely is a name that has been linked to the Detroit Pistons a ton. There has been speculation about a potential Jaden Ivey trade for LaVine. Obviously, the Pistons have a first-round draft choice this year, which I think would be an overpay for LaVine if they were to give that up in a trade for him. LaVine's on a negative contract. I would not trade for Zach LaVine myself, but I could see the Pistons doing so as they try to win more games, which is ironic because the Bulls were better without Zach LaVine this season, but I digress. Karl-Anthony Towns of the Minnesota Timberwolves. Now, Cat had a really great season for the Wolves, and the Wolves probably are not super excited about just trading away talent because they were awesome this year, and their double big lineup has worked to perfection. Tim Connolly is an absolute genius, but the reality in Minnesota is with the new CBA, they have a lot of tax implications, so if they could turn around with Detroit and trade Cat for Isaiah Stewart, Jaden Ivey, and 2 first-round picks, that's something they would consider. I really do believe, because Ivey could be the long-term point guard of the future, probably come off the bench behind Mike Conley in his first year there. They would look to turn him into kind of the long-term point guard moving forward in Minnesota, with Isaiah Stewart probably coming off the bench, filling into that Naz Reid role, while Naz Reid moves into the starting lineup. That would probably be the ideology there in Minnesota. Julius Randle, the Knicks are accomplishing a ton with him out. Now, this isn't a surefire, oh yeah, the Knicks are looking to move Julius Randle. I don't know if any of these three teams are going to be able to move or want to move their players. For Chicago, I'm not sure if they'll be able to move LaVine. For Minnesota and New York, I'm not sure if they're going to look to trade Cat and Randle respectively, but I think Randle would also be a good get in Detroit, kind of embodies Detroit basketball with his physicality, his willingness to play. He plays through injuries. He plays through contact. He's a strong, big, dominant physical player who would make Detroit significantly better. Former All-NBA player, multiple-time All-Star. He would really enhance Detroit a ton. I'm not the biggest Julius Randle guy. I think there are real flaws in his game that come out and shine during postseason time. But the reality is, with where Detroit's sitting right now, they're not looking at playoff basketball if they don't do something big. So finding some way to improve the roster, if that's a big-time trade for Cat or Julius Randle, definitely could be in the cards for Detroit. So I wanted to touch on that. I'm not sure if any of these moves really move the needle enough for them or make that much sense for them long term, but I did want to touch on them in this video. So when it comes to an early outlook for next year, first of all, the Pistons need to be way better. They can't win 14 games again. If so, there are going to be heads rolling. Monty Williams' job will be probably on the line. Troy Weaver will definitely be out as GM, if I had to guess, if they only win 15 to 20 games next year. They need to be significantly better. They need to take a jump very similar to the Houston Rockets did this year, where you go from a 22-win team for Houston all the way up to a 40-win team. Detroit needs to take a jump. Now, it might not be a 20-win jump, but it needs to be at least a 15-win jump. They need to get way better because they can't just continue to have terrible season after terrible season, and they have to build a winning culture by first winning games. You can't just have a winning culture, and that's something Monty Williams talked about all the time, saying, oh, well, we're building a winning culture, and we're kind of going through some of the growing pains. First of all, you can't do that winning 14 games. You can't establish a winning culture by constantly losing. That's just not how this works, okay? You have to win games. Detroit's front office has to put them in a position to win games, and if they're still not winning games, it's very clear Monty Williams has to go. Even with all of the money that they committed to him, I don't care. Not my contract to pay out. The Pistons have to win games. That's the first step in turning this thing around. I think Cade Cunningham will take another big step next year, but the offense and defensive scheme needs diversifying and some serious tweaks. They need to play more help defense. They need to fill the gaps a bit more. This team is not laden with elite point of attack defenders where you can just trust guys to win one-on-one battles all the time. Like, I'm sorry, Cade Cunningham is not going to shut down other team stars. Jaden Ivey, if there was one huge flaw in him coming out of Purdue, it was his point of attack defense. He plays off balance all the time. Like, Osar Thompson was your best point of attack defender, and he was a rookie, and you couldn't even play him more than 25 minutes a game because offensively there's a lot of problems yet that you're still working through in his development. They need to completely shift their defense. They cannot play one-on-one defense. They cannot play isolation defense because that's how you end up looking like the Phoenix Suns, and I'm talking about the Phoenix Suns under Frank Vogel, where even though they had a good defense throughout the course of the season, there were still a lot of flaws with the way that team was built. The overall roster construction they had, having Beal, Booker, and Durant as your three premier perimeter players. None of those guys are two-way players at the highest level. Now, I think Booker's an underrated defender. Durant obviously has his moments on defense. But the Pistons, very similar to Phoenix, are built without a ton of great point-of-attack defenders. Marcus Sasser's obviously a pretty good one, too. I should highlight him. But the Pistons, they were relying on rookies to be their defensive stoppers. It's just not going to work. So you need to completely adjust your scheme. You need to play more help defense. You need to let Duren be Jalen Duren. You need to let him switch out in space. You need to let him protect the rim. You need to simplify the game for him and not ask him to think so much. You need to let him play. And with the way Monty Williams was coaching, I think there was just way too much pressure on some of the young guys to perform and execute things that they've never done before in their life, and it just clearly didn't work. But I also do think just getting a talent increase should help. Again, it doesn't all fall on Monty Williams' shoulders. This team was not very good. Troy Weaver has not done a good job building this team up over the last couple of years. I've been one of the loudest voices in the world on Troy Weaver and his shortcomings. The Killian Hayes draft pick was the moment I fell off board with him. Okay, drafting Killian Hayes in the top 7 was ridiculous this time. And if they drafted Tyrese Halliburton, this team would look significantly different. They'd be way better right now. They took Killian Hayes. They're still paying for the sins of that draft pick with the way that their overall roster is built. And there's a reason that they've been picking top 5 every single year since. The Pistons, they need to figure it out. They need to add more talent. They need to utilize free agency for the first time as a means to improve and get better. They have $60 million in cap space. They have to do it. And if they do, they will take a jump forward next season. Probably not as significant of one as Pistons fans would like to see, but they will take a jump next year if they improve in that manner. I hope you guys did enjoy. If you did, make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more content. Thank you all so much for watching. It really does mean a lot to me. And we'll catch you in the very next Utility Sports video.